Hey guys, Barack here. I'm thinking a lot about critical thinking right now. We're going through the middle of the COVID epidemic, and I'm just thinking so much how so much has unfolded really quickly, right? Really rapidly. In the first week, I mean, it felt like a month. It felt like 3 months that packed into a week. I'm sure a lot of you guys felt the same way. And one of the things I saw right out of the gate was it really started hitting me how much people were not thinking critically immediately. And I know it's hard, and I'm not suggesting that that I'm an expert in critical thinking, but it's something I pay attention to a lot, and it's something that I've written a lot and I've talked a lot about, even long before the COVID epidemic. But I really think it's important to kind of hit some things home when we talk about critical thinking. We talk about decision making and that process. Um, if we go back to kind of whenever it was, the end of February, it honestly feels like a year was packed in the last few weeks. But just a few weeks ago, and thinking about, okay, the stock market's crashing. And you had a lot of people that instantly were like selling. They're just selling everything. They're like, get out, get out, get out. And so part of that, just from an economic standpoint, what that does to fuel the panic, and it fuels the downturn. But I remember looking at this and thinking, wait a second, why is everybody panicking? Why is everybody selling right now? And within a few days, I mean, people were like, my retirement plan is obliterated. And I remember thinking, like, wait a second, like, it's not obliterated unless it's gone. And it's not gone if you still own the investments, and I'm not suggesting I'm an investment, and I'm kind of qualifying, a lot of what I'm saying, because I know it's still, we're in a very emotional time, and I'm not trying to be arrogant in this and say, I wasn't affected. I was, I'm above, the panic and the fear, but I'm trying to highlight something that as we go through this process, and as we've been going through this process for a few weeks, that there have been a handful of things that have really highlighted to me how we as a society, and I tend to focus most on entrepreneurs and business peoples, executives, and leaders and things like that, but I'm really realizing through all of this how much we as people are not thinking critically. One of the things I think that is, I feel like it's kind of course correcting right now, maybe just this week, and we're in April, the first week of April. I feel like this piece is starting to course correct, but 2 weeks ago, I think about this example, and let me actually pose this hypothetical, which I think will illustrate what I'm getting at. Is if I said, hey, we want to figure out how many people in America are diehard sports fans. We want to do some research on that. And you think, great, that'd be interesting. I'm not interested in that, but somebody's interested in that data figure, right? So we say, okay, let's go do some research and let's figure out who are diehard sports fans. And so we go down to, I'm in Orange County, California, so we go to Angel Stadium and we start, polling people going in. Hey, are you a diehard sports fan? And, every other person, surprisingly, is like, yeah, absolutely. And, I love not just baseball, but I love, football and soccer and blah, blah, blah. When we step back from that, I'm hoping that at least half of you who just heard me say that would say, well, there's a problem. There's a systemic problem in what you just said. There's a foundational problem in what you just said. We're trying to survey Americans that are diehard sports fans, and our data group are the people that we're asking are people who are showing up to a professional baseball game. Because when we do that, there's a much higher, obviously, there's a bias in the research, right? There's a bias in that survey because it's more likely to be people who are interested in sports. We're less likely to get somebody who doesn't care about sports. So contrast that with if we wanted to get the same information, how many Americans are diehard sports fans, but we go to the mall. I'm talking about when the mall is actually open, and we stand out front and we say, hey, are you a diehard sports fan? Yes or no, as each person walking in. And we say, okay, well, that actually seems a little bit more representative because we don't know. They're not here for sports, presumably, if they're going to the mall. And we look around and we say, well, hey, there's 10-year-olds and, 90-year-olds and everything in between coming in. There's men, there's women, there's different, races, ethnicities, all that kind of stuff. And it starts to feel a lot more like it could be representative of a true cross section of America and whether they're diehard sports fans or not. And I say this for a few reasons, because even that one you could tear apart. Well, people that shop at the mall or this type of demographic, is that really what an American is? Is that really the best survey? At the end of the day, we could say, well, how do we best survey what percentage of Americans are diehard sports fans? The key point that I'm trying to make here is that if we go to the sports field and say, as people are coming in, how many of you are a diehard sports fan? That number is not going to be accurate outside of this one venue, right? It certainly doesn't represent America as a whole. And the reason why I say this is because, as the COVID data has been, unfolding, and we say this many cases here, and this percentage died, and we weren't asking the questions even 2 weeks ago, maybe even a week ago. We weren't looking at it and saying, well, wait a second, how are we getting this data? People that are sick with COVID, people that have died from COVID, versus everyone else who doesn't have it. So that percentage, that ratio. When you think about it, simultaneously we were reading that there weren't tests, there weren't enough tests, no one was being tested, or not enough people were being tested. So it begs the question: well, how do we know that there's not a much larger percentage of people who have it and that are asymptomatic, and we're just looking at the people who we know have it because they've been tested? And then we think, well, who are the people most likely to be tested? They're the ones that probably feel sick enough to say, I think I might have COVID. Will you test me, right? And so they go to the hospital, they go to the ER, they go to urgent care, whatever. And the point I'm trying to make is that in a very short span of time, we realized, I think, as a society, how little we critically think. I mean, really, how there's a lack of critical thinking. As we've seen this data unfold, as we've seen the statistics unfold, I mean, the current one this week even is you're seeing the U.S. has more deaths, more cases than any other country in the world. And they'll compare it to, wherever the sources are, but you'll see it compared to Germany, you'll see it compared to Italy, you'll see it compared to whatever. But if you think about population of the U.S. versus population of those on a per capita basis, that comparison suddenly shifts, where the U.S. actually doesn't have the high amount that we believe it does based on the data when it's based on the percentage of population. Then all of a sudden, a smaller or lesser populated country may have fewer cases, but relatively speaking, is a much higher percentage of people infected or people dying from the disease. And the reason why I say this, I realize that even me talking about this, in some respect feels very dangerous because it feels very political. If you follow me at all, you know that I tend to not be very political on social media at all. Don't talk politics, don't get into those conversations, because at the end of the day, there aren't conversations. It's just sides, basically throwing at each other. And I don't like to spend my time that way. So when I look at it, and as I talk about it, I want to make sure that I'm communicating very clearly this is not a political conversation. And in fact, this has nothing to do with politics. This has nothing to do with any politicians or any ideologies. This has to do with our ability to critically think as human beings, as business owners, as workers, whatever our capacity is that it seems that the past few weeks have demonstrated that collectively we lack the ability to critically think. We lack the ability to analyze information and interpret it in a way that's rational, simply because we're served up with information. And generally speaking, we tend to just funnel it into, if we're, liberal or conservative, if we're, this party or that party, if it's coming from this source or that source, it just gets isolated without us really critically thinking about it. So I don't want to get into what we believe as a result of our politics or ideologies, but I want to talk just a few more minutes about critical thinking. As we're getting information, the COVID epidemic, all that it's doing in this regard is illustrating that we don't think critically, or that we're not equipped to think critically. We haven't been taught to think critically, and how much we need to think critically. Our inability or our lack of thinking critically has caused a lot of panic. It's caused panic buying. It's caused panic selling. It's caused panic within homes and communities. It's caused a lot of things based on misunderstandings. And it's not to say any of this information is wrong. It's not to say any of this information is right. It's to say that we haven't spent the time really assessing, is it right or wrong, and why would we think that? Another quick example. For the first few weeks, well, actually not in the very beginning, but somewhere in the middle of the last few weeks, we started to be told wearing a mask is pointless, absolutely pointless. Unless you're a medical professional, it's pointless. And I remember the first time I saw that headline somewhere, wherever it was, I don't remember, but thinking about, imagine having a hose and spraying water, and just out in the air. And then imagine, hanging a sheet, just a bed sheet, right? And spraying a hose. And I mean, visualize that. If I spray the hose versus put a sheet in front of the hose, something happens to the flow. I'm not saying it doesn't get through. What I'm saying is something happens. Rationally, it's impossible that travels through the exact same way when the sheet's there versus when it's not there. And it made me think, a mask, it's impossible. It's literally impossible that it makes no difference. And I started to think about this. I started to think about, well, why would they say this? And then it hit me, well, it's a manipulation to make sure that the medical professionals have the protective equipment because there's not enough of it. So if the powers that be that are communicating this message are able to say, hey, it's pointless, so that I, as a consumer, think, oh, it's pointless, I'm not going to buy it, then the logic being, well, then that means that there's more for the medical community. But what happened is it confused people. Confused people because the logical ones are thinking, that doesn't make sense, that a mask of any sort, even a t-shirt wrapped or a sock wrapped around your face, wouldn't make any difference. Versus the people that said, oh, well, that's what they're saying. That's what the professionals are saying, so I'm just not going to wear a mask. And suddenly, we're still reading that the medical professionals don't have it. And all of a sudden, the narrative changed. And I think, out of caution, I think whoever was kind of sending that message realized, actually, this is a really bad message to send, because what we're doing now is making people think it doesn't make a difference to wear a mask when those people who are infected but asymptomatic may be out coughing on other people. Because they're not wearing a mask, so it can't keep that, that phlegm, that spit, whatever, from going on to other people. So the current logic is, hey, you should be wearing a mask. And in some counties and some states, it's required to wear a mask if you leave the home. But it shouldn't be an N95 mask because we need to reserve those for the medical front lines, which is great. I'm not saying I disagree with it at all. But you see how the narrative changed from a completely illogical standpoint intended to manipulate people into a position to preserve that protective equipment for the medical community to actually, you should be wearing a mask, but just don't take the good ones because we need those for the medical professions. And that's great. If we would have started with that, that sounds logical and makes a lot of sense. People could have bought into that as a society, but instead the society was confused, and there are people trying to figure out this doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute. So I say all this again. I realize I'm touching on some of these topics that feel very politicized, and well, Brock, if you're saying that, you must believe this. There's no politics behind my commentary. My commentary is strictly and exclusively about our ability to critically think. The reason why this is so important is because what's happening with COVID right now is it's simply illustrating our collective inability to critically think. I'm worried less about right now because there's certainly a flow of information, and there's probably too many voices speaking into it in the first place. I'm thinking about a year from now. I'm thinking about 5 years from now. If we don't learn how little we thought rationally through the different stuff that we're having to face on an hour-by-hour basis, how are we dealing with this in our businesses? How are we dealing with this in our school systems? How are we dealing with this in our even our home lives when we're currently being shown we can't be trusted with critical thinking because we don't. So can we learn to critically think now? Can we start to exercise that muscle of critical thinking? And that's really what I'm trying to get at is My encouragement for you, if you're taking the time to watch this video, and you know, some of it even for me feels like, okay, I'm kind of rambling, and the reason why is because I'm thinking through this out loud. There's no script here with me. There's never a script in anything, my podcast, you know, any of that stuff. There's never a script. And this one I'm truly processing through as I'm saying it, and I'm thinking, what can we learn from this moment? There's a lot that we can learn from this moment in all different aspects of humanity. I'm talking about critically thinking. What can we learn in this moment about our skill set as it relates to critical thinking? And here's what I'm trying to say is we don't demonstrate one. And we need to, because critical thinking is what gets us out of trouble, helps us avoid trouble in business and in life, helps us make better financial decisions. It helps us make better business decisions, family decisions, emotional decisions. When we can critically think through what our options are, how we approach, how we strategize, how we plan around a certain topic, we're much more likely to come out with a safer, with a healthier, you know, objective and goal and plan to achieve it than if we just look at it and start taking in information. Because right now, that's what we're demonstrating as a society. That the more I can pile up information that's consistent with this, you know, if we pick up on one thread and then we pile 100 threads on top of it that are consistent with that one, we've done our thinking for us. It's done our thinking for us. That pile of thread is basically dictated that that's the logical, rational choice. When instead we should be asking questions. We should be challenging, why are these things? And I'm not suggesting at all that we suddenly become you know, conspiracy theorists and start questioning things that our own questions are completely illogical. I want us to have logical questions. I want us to have rational questions. Is it rational to think that the data surrounding percentages of populations or the death rate of COVID is accurate? At this point, absolutely not. It's not logical. And the reason why is because, I mean, we're seeing this actually in the last 24 or 48 hours. And of course, there's a spin on it, and it's politically motivated from both directions, like normal, is, you know, if you died right now and you tested positive for COVID, then you may be checked the box that you died of COVID. And there's a difference. I might have died of a heart attack, but I was also positive with COVID. The data that's coming out right now, and whenever this changes, I have no idea, but right now, if my understanding from what I've read is that if somebody passes away right now and they test positive for COVID, that regardless of why they actually died, that will be the reason for death. What do you think that does to the data surrounding the death rate for COVID? Again, it may be accurate. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying, are we asking the question, is this biased information? Is this accurate information? Have we really rationally questioned whether this process is correct, whether we're even asking the right questions? I'm not going to become a doctor or a scientist, an epidemiologist, or any of those things that, you know, a lot of people seem to have become in the last few weeks. But I've always been one to ask questions, and I will continue to do that. And I think that asking questions helps you to, you know, exercise that muscle of critical thinking. So my encouragement to you is, and I'm going to end it with this. Here's my encouragement. Here's why I did this video. If there's a takeaway that you have during this moment, if you were one that was laid off from your work, if you're one that maybe, you know, lost your job forever, if you're one that just, you know, hey, you got some nice time off, if you're one that's still working like me, you know, I'm still working nonstop. And so wherever you are in this spectrum, at some point in the future, life will return back to, quote, normal, whatever that looks like. And it will be important for us to have learned something from this time frame. There's a lot that we need to learn from this time frame, but one of the things we must learn from this time frame is that it's been proven we don't think critically very well. So what can we do to improve our critical thinking, and why do we need to improve it? If you can't answer that, if you can't understand that critical thinking helps you make better decisions, make informed decisions in business, in emotions, in finances, in life, in relationships, all of it, then that's part of the problem. So that's my encouragement for you. Start to think critically. Start to ask the questions. Don't become a conspiracy theory in the process. Don't politicize your questions. Don't turn them into narratives to fit your ideology. Just ask the questions because they're the right questions to ask. Because at the end of the day, what's the goal of information? What's the goal of you seeking information? It's to find the truth, whatever that truth may be. It may actually bolster our position and our ideologies. It may actually undermine it. And I think what happens is we're kind of getting trained to say, I don't want to look at anything that might undermine my ideology, so I'm just not going to look at it. I'm just going to accept the compounding effect of threads stacking on top of each other until my point is proven by the multitude of threads on it. That's not critical thinking. And so if that's your guiding light, if that's your guiding principle, obviously you will be easily manipulated. And even if you're not being manipulated on a topic, you'll have no skill set developed to make good decisions. So there's my encouragement for you. Think critically, and the way that you delve into that, the way that you start strengthening that muscle of thinking critically is to start asking questions. Start that today. Look at everything that you're feeding your mind with, whatever that is, whatever topic it is, and start asking questions. Where is this coming from? Is there a bias? Is it accurate? Is there even a way it could be accurate? What are the implications of if it was done this way versus that way? All that kind of stuff. I'm going to end it with that. You guys keep going. I know we're in a hard time in life globally, which is a rare circumstance. Pretty much it's, well, this industry got hit or that industry got hit. Everybody's getting hit in one way or another. So I know we're all kind of facing our own challenges, but stick with this. Keep pushing forward because there's light at the end of the tunnel. And what you have to have is a plan for where you're going to be a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, not oh my gosh, the world's over. So think critically, go after it, you guys. I know you can do it. Talk to you again soon.